Eu entrevistei um padre. Sim, é isso mesmo que você ouviu. Eu lhe garanto que vale muito a pena assistir esse vídeo até o final. Não só porque você vai rir do meu inglês, como acontece costumeiramente, mas porque é uma manifestação clara de algo que eu tenho dito há muito tempo aqui no YouTube. De que, primeiro, é fundamental que católicos e protestantes definam bem as suas diferenças. Não temos a mesma religião, não devemos ceder a nenhum tipo de ecumenismo religioso, mas quando o assunto envolve engajamento social, luta por pautas pró-vida, como combate ao aborto, ou até mesmo questões de ordem social e econômica, existe aquilo que Francis Schaeffer, que dá nome ao nosso instituto, o Instituto Schaeffer de Teologia e Cultura, chamou de cobeligerância. Católicos, evangélicos e outros grupos religiosos podem estar lado a lado, lutando por uma sociedade mais justa, mais íntegra e mais livre. Por isso que eu pude bater um papo com o Padre Cirico lá nos Estados Unidos, quando eu estive na Acton University. O Padre Cirico é presidente emérito da Acton e publicou 3 livros que existem em português sobre liberdade econômica de uma perspectiva cristã. Seu livro mais recente se chama A Economia nas Parábolas, um trabalho de teologia interessantíssimo sobre o que é que as parábolas bíblicas nos ensinam sobre dinheiro, sobre economia, sobre liberdade. E esse é o tema da conversa que a gente vai ter agora.
O Robert Cirico é o autor de alguns livros sobre economia e religião, o incrível Defending the Free Market, The Moral Case for a Free Economy, e o recém-lançado em português, A Economia das Parábolas, onde ele fala sobre economia de uma perspectiva cristã, a partir das parábolas, e chega a conclusões interessantíssimas sobre como o Novo Testamento entende certas relações de dinheiro, mercado e troca. E a gente vai ter um papo com ele agora sobre essas coisas. Father Cirico, is
good to be with you.
A great blessing to be with you here. And you don't know anything what I said.
Oh yes, no, I followed a bit of it. I speak Italian, so
Italian is a Latin language as well.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
Amazing. I'm with a priest. He knows Italian. First and more important question.
Yes.
Did you watch The Sopranos?
I watched every episode of The Sopranos, and I'll tell you a little secret.
Yeah.
The creator of The Sopranos, David Chase, called and asked for my advice on a scene. And it appears in, I think it's the 4th or 5th season, where Carmela goes to confession.
Yeah.
And the priest tells her to live the sacrament.
And that's why I question that, because you has a brother in Sopranos as well.
Yes, my brother was Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos. He died last year, almost a year ago. And so I got to know a lot of the people and I was on the set. And David Chase even asked me to play a priest on it, but I declined.
Would be a nice thing to see. Now the most serious questions. When you talk about market, people be, how I say that, maybe it's scandals, because people from church can't be defending market, that read people, sinful people, they read hate us.
And prophets are evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can a priest from a Catholic church talk defending the market?
Well, there's several ways, and I've written books on it, as you noted already, but let me first say what a market is.
Yeah.
Because I think people don't understand that. People think that a market is a place, or that a market is just a big business, and that the profits that entrepreneurs get from a market are exploitative. A market is simply people searching for the best use of resources that they have and that they can supply for their families. It's human action. And that's why in the parables, Jesus uses so many economic presuppositions. Now, I'm not saying that the purpose of the parables was to teach economic lessons. The purpose of the parables was to teach us about the kingdom of God, right? Jesus says repeatedly, the kingdom of God may be likened unto, and then what does he point to? Very often he points to markets or finance or loans or inheritance rights or the right of private property, laborers and salaries. All of those things are in the parables, and I handle 12 of them in there. But let me also say, we often hear, especially Marxists, liberation theologians, say to business people, you are exploiting people. You are getting money that you haven't put into things. You're taking from people the profits that they have produced for you. You know who that sounds like? It sounds like the wicked servant in Matthew's gospel, in the parable of the talents. You remember that Jesus has this story of the master who leaves 3 servants some talents. One he gives 5, one he gives 2, and one he gives 1. And he comes back And the first two have multiplied doubled their talents. The last one, what does he say to the master? When the master comes and says, what did you do? He said, I hid your talent. Why did you hide my talent? Because I knew you were a cruel man. Listen to what he says. Gathering where you have not sown and scattering where you have not planted, or, so he's saying to the master, you are an exploiter. The profit you make is exploitative. You didn't sow, and yet you're gathering. This is where Marx got his philosophy from the wicked servant. And that servant, of course, gets cast out into the darkness. So profits themselves are not evil. The legitimate question that moral people have is every action in a market, is every trade moral? And the answer to that question is no. Everything can be put for sale on a market. Doesn't mean that it's right or just, because it's just reflective of human action that is peaceful. Sometimes people buy things that are wrong, to indulge in things that are wrong. It may be drugs, it may be alcohol, it may be luxury goods that they overconsume, and they place the consumption above who they are. They place the possession over their being. These are evil things. But the market itself and profits themselves are not intrinsically evil. They're not evil by nature. They're evil by the misprioritization that people place on them.
In Brazil, we talk a lot with people from liberation theology.
Yes.
And in our schools, we are really influenced by that.
Yes, I know.
So we rose, listen to people and teachers telling us that Catholic Church is against profit and it's a sin to borrow money with a fee. How the social doctrine of the Catholic Church understand these things?
Well, the question is a very long question, because the history of the church's social teaching is very long. It goes back to the book of Acts in a way. And there were various periods of time where different ideas were in play. But let me make very clear that the social doctrine of the church is a practical engagement with the world. Largely, it is prudent. People can have different ideas on different political or economic policies. That's not what is canonized. What is canonized is the basis, the foundation of the church's social teaching. And what is that? The dignity of the human person, that each human being has an intrinsic dignity endowed by God. And the other thing is that we are all related to one another. This is what we call the doctrine of, or the principle of solidarity, that I recognize myself in other people. And then the third principle of Catholic social teaching that is foundational is the principle of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity basically says that human needs are best met at the most local level, because that's where people know the need, what the real need is. And that state intervention at various levels should be very rare and temporary. It should withdraw and let the natural economy, let the business market operate. This is the social teaching of the church. The church doesn't have a set price on what a good or a service is. The price is determined by people's needs. It's determined by supply and demand. And the question of exploitation is a separate question from economic information.
You wrote a book about economics in the parables of Christ. Né?
Yes.
That's amazing book. I already read it. I already have an English copy with your site.
Yes.
Now I have a Portuguese copy with your site as well. So I have both. And you talk to us a lot of lessons about money, market, liberty. How we can understand the biblical teachings about economics without a sort of anachronism? Seeing Jesus as a kind of proto-liberal economist, or some kind of putting Jesus in a box of my Christian perspective, my political perspective. Yeah. How we can do that with a responsible way?
Yes, we must not. So in biblical studies, we have these fancy words, technical words.
You can use that here.
Yes,
People are use it
I'll
too.
use it and then I'll define it just to make sure everybody knows.
Yeah.
There's called exegesis.
Yeah.
Exegesis is when you read a text and you draw out the meaning of the text. But there's also eisegesis, where you put into the text your own presupposition, your own idea, your own ideology. I was very careful not to do that because I knew that I'd have many critics reading the book and say, he's put that, it's not in the text. But you read it and you see. So the first thing you need to understand is that Jesus was not teaching economics, but he was using illustrations. He was likening the kingdom of God to various things, including markets.
Yeah.
Now, let me anticipate one objection that many people viewing might have. They say, but didn't Jesus condemn wealth when the rich man came to him?
Yeah.
Didn't he tell that man that his wealth was evil and he must give it all away? And this is where we exegete, not eisegete. Read the text. The man comes to Jesus and said, what must I do to be perfect? And he said, keep the commandments. And he says, I've done that. He said, oh, okay. Well, why don't you come and be my follower? But first you have to give away all your money? That's not what he says. The first command of Jesus to that man is go and sell all that you have. Where do you sell things? You sell things in a market and then give to the poor. Jesus in that text doesn't even say give everything to the poor. He says you sell, you give to the poor. Now, if there's a relationship between what the man sells and gains by the sale and the service of the poor, it's easy to assume that the man had to get a good profit in order to help the poor. So that's the first thing. And then he invites him and come and be my follower. You know, it's the same words that Jesus uses there that he uses when he meets Peter and John. He says, come and follow me. We could have had a 13th apostle.
Yeah.
But the young man walks away sad because he had many riches. So he puts the wealth in front of the kingdom of God. Now, at the end of it, if we want to interpret this, the apostles say to Jesus, what's this all about? What happened? And Jesus says that very famous passage that everybody always brings up. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. And people leave it there. They say, oh, see, it's impossible. And a camel can't go through the eye of a needle. And the apostles have the same reaction. Well, then who can be saved? And what does Jesus say? He gives us the answer to the parable. Does he say, yeah, that's right, rich people are going to hell? That's not what he says. He says, with man, it is impossible. With God, all things are possible. So what Jesus is saying is that if a wealthy person has a lot of belongings, they have to see that in second place. The first thing is following Jesus Christ, being his disciple, which means surrendering everything we have. In the case of a rich person, it's surrendering all their wealth. In the case of other people, it's surrendering their pride. It's surrendering gossip. It's surrendering slander. There are other things to be surrendered as well. Wealth is a tool. When it becomes a god, when it becomes an idol, then we have a problem, a moral problem.
Trying to build some, just a little bit more,
Sure.
If your answer. In the gospel, Jesus talked about selling everything and giving to the poor in Acts, the church lived by having everything in common in the epistles.
Yes.
We have Paul talking about not being some living in need in the church,
Right.
while others are richer.
Right.
How does all this not indicate a leftist wing Christianity?
Again, by the way, you know who said that there was communism in the early church? It was Karl Marx.
Yeah.
You know, so is there? Let's look at that passage in Acts. And not just the passage in the second chapter of Acts or in the fourth chapter, but let's go later and see how they're dealing with this. It's true that the early church had this experiment holding things in common where people had needs and they supplied the needs from their abundance. Does this mean that private property is evil? Well, we have an example in two people who were in that early church by the name of Ananias and Sapphira. The Acts of the Apostles says they had a piece of property, piece of land, and they sold it, and they kept back some of it and brought a part of it and placed it at the feet of the apostles. And Peter says, why have you lied to the Holy Spirit? He said, wasn't that property your own when you had it? And after you sold it, weren't the proceeds yours? He said, your problem is you've lied to the Holy Spirit. And then their judgment takes place. So what you see in the whole context of that experiment, I want to emphasize that it was an experiment because the early church had property. They had wealthy people who supported the mission of Jesus. The women who went with Jesus. Mary Magdalene was probably very wealthy. When we study what Magdala is and what her kind of enterprise was, or Lydia, who invites the apostles to her home, there were a whole bunch of people in her home and her servants, she must have had a lot of money. And even then, women lived longer than men, so they inherited a lot of money. Joseph of Arimathea. Jesus dies with a very fancy suit on, right? In effect, the seamless garment. But their relationship to it was to say, if there's a person in need, then I help. Here's a wonderful quotation that I found when I was writing the book from Winston Churchill, the great British statesman. He said, the socialism of the early church said, all that is mine is yours. The socialism of today says, all that is yours is mine. That's the difference. To the extent that they shared their belongings, they shared it. It was not confiscated. It was not expropriated. It was not taxed from them. People shared out of the goodness of their hearts. And that's a much more radical conversion. You can conform somebody to the law, but you can't change their hearts unless you inspire them, unless they have a conversion.
My favorite chapter of Defending Free Markets is called, let me check, Want to Help the Poor? Start a Business. Explain that to us. How start a business will help poor communities?
Well, everybody talks about the poor and they're concerned about the poor and, they have good sentiments for the poor.
Yeah.
But when you say, well, what are you going to do about the poor? They make programs and policies to make sure they have more poor people because the ineffectual policies, the poor are not helped in a systematic way. If we're talking about not just helping this family at this moment because they need food, charity is perfectly appropriate and necessary in those circumstances. But the normal way to help the poor out of poverty is not redistribution. It's not charity. It's systems that produce more, that are economically profitable systems. The normal way in which people rise out of poverty is having access to work. That is to have jobs. If you did a historical, Brazil is a very good example of it.
Yeah.
Most of Brazil's history people were poor. But when the labor market began to be free and there were better and more clear rules for private property and business and enterprise was allowed to function, and there were lower taxes, the standard of living, the economic income went up. Throughout the world in the last 200 years, we see this line of people where they lived at subsidy levels, very low levels, and all of a sudden, about 200 years ago, it goes up. Well, what happened in that 200-year period? That's when industrialization takes place. That's when enterprise, business takes place. People can trade. People trade with one another because they believe that in the trade, if it's free, that they get more than they give up. And that's what creates wealth. So when I say you want to help the poor, start a business. You want to feed the poor, create a grocery store. Let people come and buy. Let them work, earn profits, and help their families. That's the source of the wealth of nations. It's not socialist redistribution. You can kill the goose that lays the golden egg. We have this idiom in English. I don't know if it exists in Portuguese.
Yeah.
Okay. So you see the goose laying the golden egg. Wonderful. Well, let's get another one. You know what? Let's cut open the goose and get the gold. And then the goose is dead and you don't have any golden eggs. That's what the free market system is like. Now, there are complications with this because some people are greedy and some people are exploited.
Yeah.
And some people, especially in Latin America, though increasingly in the United States, they become profitable and with their money, they buy politicians.
Yeah.
This is called crony capitalism. We call it in English. And this is not the free market. This is a manipulation of an economy that we need to speak out against.
Yeah. Greed is a sin.
Yes.
We agree about it.
Yes.
Even as capitalists, people from...
But let's define what we mean by greed.
Yeah.
Greed is desire, but we're not saying desire is sin, right?
Yeah.
Because we all desire. I desire a drink of water right now. That's not a sin. What greed is inordinate desire. It's a desire that goes beyond it's not just wanting to have something, it's wanting to have everything and preventing other people from having it. So yes, greed is evil. Greed and what they call consumerism is evil, but not because the material objects are evil. To consume is not evil. We eat. We have to eat to live our lives. What is evil about consumerism is it places the material above the human. And the human is the being that is endowed with dignity and the image of God. Consumerism is this inordinate desire for things. You know, God has placed in each of our hearts a desire for everything, for the good. Why is that? Because we desire Him, and He is everything that is good. And what happens is people get confused and they substitute other things. So they'll substitute, fancy things or jewelry or houses or food or drugs or alcohol for God. C.S. Lewis said in each person there is this God-shaped hole, this vacuum, and it can only be filled by God. But people very often look to fill it with other things, and they find at the end of the day they're not. So what greed is, what consumerism is, what lust is really a kind of search for God in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Someone once said that St. Augustine, one of the great saints of the church, said that even the man knocking on the door of a brothel is really looking for God. He's not looking for that woman. He's looking for the thing that will satisfy him the most, which is relationship with Jesus Christ.
But greed is not intrinsic to capitalism?
Well, no. Poor people who are greedy.
Yeah.
And they don't have access to markets and capitalism. No, moreover, greed isn't even just economic. Greed can be for your friend's wife. Greed can be for food. Greed can be for a lot of different things. As I say, it's desire that is disordered. It's directed in the wrong place. So no, it's not intrinsic to capitalism. Are there certain temptations within a free market, within a productive economy, that would invite people to be greedy, to consume more? Yes. Would you say that the human capacity for sexuality is intrinsically evil? What about marriage? What about the creation of new life? But if you have a disordered sexual passion that causes you to be promiscuous or in many other ways, then that's a sin. There's the same thing with desire. The 7 deadly virtues? You've heard of the 7 deadly virtues?
Yeah.
Greed is one of them. But it's not greed, that we're talking about. Greed is not desire. It's not the desire to be better. Money is not the sin. St. Paul says it's not the money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money. That is the inordinate desire for money that's the root of all evil. It's not sex that is evil in the 7 deadly virtues. It's lust that is evil. So we just have to be more balanced in our theological understanding and not eisegete into the moral teachings of the Christian faith this presupposition that somehow a free market is by its nature evil. It can be evil because human beings can be evil.
For a time. My last question will be a tricky one, but you will do well. Living today, Jesus will be a Republican or a Democrat?
Living today, Jesus would be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.
Amen.
Somebody once asked me, why don't you run for president? And I said, I have a higher calling.
Amazing. Thank you for your time.
God bless you.
I'm really glad to speak with you here.
Obrigado.
And you'll be talking Portuguese. Through the subtitles. Se você quiser saber mais sobre a Acton, Padre Cirico é um dos fundadores da Acton. Você vai ter um link aqui na descrição para conhecer mais. E os livros do Padre Cirico também, você vai poder comprar no link que vai estar aqui embaixo, em português. Se você não sabe ler inglês, Economia das Parábolas está à sua disposição pela LVM Editora. E certamente você consegue encontrar no link que está aí na descrição. Se você chegou aqui agora, considere se inscrever no canal, clicar aí no gostei para dizer que esse vídeo é importante também para as outras pessoas na plataforma. E quem sabe considere, ano que vem, estar aqui em Grand Rapids também, na Acton, University. Um abraço e até a próxima.